I felt abandoned because the nurse said, I'm not helping with that family. I'm not doing it. And she didn't. I didn't ever see that nurse, but I didn't know why. I didn't question it.
Let me ask this. Who was giving the orders to do the internal fetal monitors?
I just think she gave orders from her phone or computer, whatever it was. That's how the orders would come through. But the reason why the C-section took so long once it was called for was because the doctor was really sleeping just a minute down the hallway and nobody went to wake her up. And she said in her deposition that, yep, she did. She went to sleep.
And that was it? That's all she said?
Yeah, she had the monitor on her phone. If she was reading it, 12 hours before my C-section was one of the very first signs of, hey, you might need to watch this.
When I was listening to that, I always wonder why. What world are we living in for this to happen? Because the Joint Commission over hospitals and the policies that are set in place are supposed to protect you as a patient. I am hoping that this makes hospitals sit up and pay attention. Welcome to the Keeping Your Power Real Talk on Resilience podcast. I'm your host, Tracidoula. I'm a family and birth advocate, a mentor, and your personal encourager. I wanted to create the space for individuals, families, and professionals who are done with just surviving and want to rise. Because when everything feels like it's falling apart, the one thing the world can't take from you is your power. And that's where resilience begins. It's not just riding the waves or surviving the storms. It's about how to overcome the challenges. So whether you're in the thick of it or reflecting on where you've been, pull up a chair and let's navigate the hard conversations and the beautiful stories that together we can be honest and use empathy and have a desire to grow, all while, of course, keeping your power in the process. Hi, Anyssa. Thank you for just sitting down with me today. I'm so excited to talk to you.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Okay, well, you've had a lot go on, and we are going to dive into it because I think it's super important to give you this safe space just to talk about your story. And I want to just hug you through the screen. And so just introduce yourself just real fast. We'll start with that.
My name is Anyssa Zancanella. I'm from Wyoming. I am currently 25, but at the time of my daughter being born, I was 19. So a lot of things have changed in that 6 years. So,
oh, wow. I mean, you have grown up and are actually an adult. I had my first at 18, or I was actually 19, or I was pregnant when I was 18. And it's amazing that not only do we kind of grow up with that pregnancy when we're teenagers, but then in that time frame, and then you going through the trial and everything that has happened, I bet your critical thinking process has developed full on. Do you feel
absolutely it has?
Yeah, you just light speeds had to grow up a lot. So let's start off with your pregnancy, because I have followed your story as much as I have tried to get to some of the answers too. So I'm going to try to channel my listeners and our watchers to think about, okay, what would they love to hear about your story? So let's talk about your pregnancy first.
Okay. Well, I found out, I was only a year out of high school. So when I found out that I was having a baby, it was not planned. It was totally by accident. And, it was a beautiful accident. And her dad and I decided, let's just be friends. I was young and not ready for that. So we did. We had the best co-parenting relationship throughout my whole entire pregnancy.
That's beautiful.
I had amazing care in Wyoming. We're at my hospital here from our OBGYN. And she was the best little OBGYN ever too, because I've had her forever and I got to see her all the time and she was so excited. And it was our goal that she was going to be the doctor who delivered. And throughout my whole pregnancy, that was something that we really talked about, because in October, she was going to move back home and be home. And so I was like, well, you got to stay until you deliver my baby. And so it got to the point where we were finally okay, we can induce on this day. And it was 2 days before she was supposed to leave was my induce.
Your birthing day.
Yeah. Yep. That's when we were going to do it. So,
that's so sweet though.
It was.
I
I
love
had a good
that.
relationship with her, and I had a beautiful pregnancy. I loved being pregnant, actually.
Aw.
Like, it was the best thing. I never was sick. I got sick 3 times.
Don't tell your friends that, Anissa.
I know everybody gets mad at me. They're like, "Oh my God." And I'm like, I didn't. I got sick over 3 things, like rice cereal, a popsicle, and an ice cream. And those were the only things that made me just not a happy camper.
Oh,
But
funny.
it was fun. You know, I got pregnancy pictures, like maternity pictures and 4D ultrasounds. Both my grandparents. We drove down to Utah and did like a little us 3 went and did these pictures and got to get the heartbeat in the elephant and decorate shopping, and it was so much fun. That was an experience in itself. I loved being pregnant. Even my second go around. It was beautiful.
I enjoyed being pregnant too, but it's like, you get to the end and you're just like, oh,
The end is miserable.
The end is like insane.
That
So
last
you didn't
4
have,
weeks.
yeah, the last 4 weeks you're like, get it out. Get it out. And I understand all the hoopla on the natural induction methods and all those things. Like, I get it, but our bodies and our babies do what they want to do. So you didn't have any like eventful things go on in your pregnancy at all, like high blood pressure, gestational diabetes, no like small baby, big baby, and lots of fluid, no fluid, like all the things. So it was just super uneventful.
Yep, it was a very good pregnancy. Everything was good.
That is amazing. Because really, statistically, the younger you are, like under a certain age, I would say like 22. I think the evidence-based information is like 22. We are at risk for having some not good maternal things like high blood pressure and those kind of things, and like low
My blood pressure did run high, but it was never
like over. Mm-hmm.
Like over concern.
That's awesome. Okay, so tell me at the very beginning of this birth story, what were the first things that happened that told you that you might need medical care?
We drove down to Utah to go down from Wyoming, and it's only about a 2.5-hour drive, and so that's, to us, that's not a very, very long drive at all.
Mm-hmm. And how many were you?
39 in 3 days, I think. 39 weeks in 3 days. And so we went down there, and it was just like a little family outing, just because I was going to be a mom now. Like, I wasn't going to be by myself anymore. And so we went down there, we had dinner, had a bunch of fun with family, and then went back to the hotel. And I was sitting on the toilet, and I noticed that I was dripping a little bit. And I was like, oh, that's strange. So we all sat around, and my aunt and my mom were like, well, maybe we should go to the hospital. And I was like, well, we probably have time to drive home. And they were like, well, no, we probably need to my stepdad was like, go to the other hospital. And my mom and everybody else was like, well, we can just go to this hospital that's closest to us. And
do you feel like your mom, and maybe because maybe the generation thing kind of gets us, and the movies, like water breaks, then labor is supposed to like immediately start, so do you think that they were just kind of nervous about, hey, let's not drive home, let's just go ahead and go to the hospital?
Honestly, I think everybody was more like, we're in Utah, our facility here in Wyoming isn't the best.
Okay.
We were more like, hey, we're in Utah, nothing could happen. But, because that's if you get sick here, sometimes they're like, well, go to Utah, or they lifeline you to Utah, or, so we were like, we'll be good. We can go there and get a second opinion, see what they say. Like, if we have time to drive home, great. If we don't, then we'll just stay, So that's what we ultimately decided to do, was just go in there and see if maybe my water hadn't broke all the way, or if we do have time. And when we got there, they said, yep, my water broke. Absolutely. This baby's coming tonight. And this was October 12th, that like 10:30 in the evening. And they said, yep, that baby's coming. We were like, oh my gosh. So I called her dad. Her dad was on his way the next morning. Everybody was coming down. My grandma was coming down. We were all excited. They all got there, and they were getting ready to start my IV. And I never in my life had an issue with an IV placement ever before in my life. And the head charge nurse came in and started poking me and could not place the IV. And she kept poking and poking.
Where was she what place was she trying to put it? Like,
she was trying to get it in my arm in my hand at first, but then she blew my vein. Then she tried again. And so my mom was like, well, hey, are you going to get somebody in here who knows what they're doing? And the nurse was like, well, I have 3 times and then I can get somebody else in here. Are you going to be in here when your daughter delivers this baby? And my mom goes, yeah, I am. Are you? So then that nurse got up, went and got a new nurse. And that new nurse came in and started poking my other hand, blew that vein, could not do it. Started poking my arm, could not do it. And she said, okay, well, she ran out of tries. So she had to go and get the lab technician
So
to come in.
it sounds like to me they had kind of like an understanding or a policy that they only got 3 tries. Maybe their training.
Yes.
It was like, okay, we have 3 tries and we're done. Which I love your mom and her advocacy, man. I love that. That makes my heart swell. Good job, mom. So they one person couldn't get it. The charge nurse couldn't get it. You know, it's good to speak up. You know, whoever's listening to this, you know,
Absolutely it is.
up, even if, you know, you didn't want the 3rd try, you know, your mom was right to say, hey, you know, you might have 3 tries, but you're
But
not,
you just blew her vein.
you're not getting it. Right. So even if the 3rd try hasn't come yet, somebody could absolutely speak up. So somebody else came in and they couldn't get it either.
Yep. It took 5.5 hours to get my IV in. I didn't get my IV in until October 13th at like 1 in the morning, 1:30.
And you went in
at 10:30
on the 12th. And so why was that? What was the hard part?
They said that I was dehydrated, but I don't think I was. I don't believe that. I was very, very, very cautious on everything I did in my first pregnancy, like from what I ate to what I drank to everything. It was like by the book, that pregnancy.
Well, I can't wait for some healthcare workers to listen to this, because I'm willing to bet that IVs are given all the time on people who are dehydrated.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure, because you have to hydrate them.
So did you finally get one?
Yes, I did. They finally got it in, and that's when they started the Pitocin.
So did they immediately start the Pitocin?
Yes.
And was there a like risk benefit? Why are we starting, like, this is why we're starting Pitocin?
No, just to induce my contractions, like to get my contractions going. But my contractions were going. As soon as that Pitocin started, my contractions were going a lot. Like, it was incredibly painful.
Were you starting to contract before the Pitocin hit, like between the time you got to the hospital or even after your water had started breaking or leaking to the time that they got your IV in?
Not when I got into the hospital. Not when I first got in.
Mm-hmm.
It had taken a couple hours of the Pitocin that then my contractions started.
Mm-hmm. So they didn't have the conversation of why, you know, your water's broken. So did they say something like, your water's broken, we need to speed this up because of, you know, we need to have contractions because your water has been broken, and this is why we're starting Pitocin? Was that ever a conversation?
No. I was in so much pain so frequently that I honestly don't even remember a whole lot. And the doctor at this time hadn't even been in.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the nurses.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, no, the doctor hadn't been in. They just said that the doctor said that because I am a new mom, that my pregnancy, my laboring can prolong and be longer, so that my symptoms were nothing to worry about. My contractions so short together were as nothing. And so at one point I had said, well, can I have my epidural?
Mm-hmm.
They said, no, you can't have that until after you pass the 4 centimeters.
Mm-hmm.
Dilation. And I was like, okay, well, is there anything? Because my contractions were so close. I don't know exactly like the number of how close they were, but they were so close that I was just in pain. And so I said, well, is there anything you guys can give me?
Mm-hmm.
And they were like,
I've been there. I've been on Pitocin and screened for epidurals.
it's awful. Like, thinking about it, my stomach, I was just like every 5 minutes, like every 3 minutes, I'd just be cramping again. And I was like, oh. And
so again, it sounds like they had a protocol that they wanted their people, when they were managing a labor, or augmenting, for induction to make a baby come, they wanted, you to be, or their patients to be at least 4 centimeters before they got an epidural, which I hear that a lot, and I think is cruel and unusual punishment if you already have Pitocin started. Like, the Pitocin, the epidural is not going to slow down your labor if Pitocin is already in your system. So I don't understand why that would have been a thing, neither here nor there. I'm just kind of thinking out loud a little bit. That's odd to me. 26 years experience. I feel like that is excessive to not allow that to happen. And also another question, you said you didn't know how close together they were. You just knew that they were, pretty on top of each other. And then the excuse that you were given of that was, well, you're a first time mom, so it might take a little bit longer for this process. So we want them close together, I guess is what they were meaning. And it's okay because that's what we're doing here is we want these contractions close together. But it sounds
They
like
pretty much just told me everything was good. Like everything, this is normal. They told me they could give me some fentanyl
okay.
for the pain, but that was the only thing that they could give me at all. Like that was all that they were allowed to administer me. And I was like, I'm not a big fan of that, but they were so painful that I opted into that. I was like, yep. Like whatever you do, like just give me something or take this baby out. And so they did. That's what I ended up taking.
When you were starting to feel these contractions, you said it took a little while. It took maybe a couple of hours for the Pitocin to kind of kick in. Do you remember them coming into your room and turning up the Pitocin during these 2 hours? Like how often?
A few times.
Yeah. How often they because there is a protocol. There is a standard of titrating. Pitocin, the standard is really, every 30 minutes or so to go up by 2. Do you remember what number your Pitocin pump was on? You might not. That might be just
because I'm not the one that went over all those. My attorneys did.
Mm-hmm.
I know that she had told me at one point my Pitocin was sitting at least 24 or higher for multiple hours.
Wow. Cause that's a lot. That's a lot even with an epidural. Okay, let's back up just a little bit. So you started wanting an epidural and they said that you couldn't have it and you got the fentanyl. Were you able to rest at all during
a little bit. The fentanyl helped for maybe an hour.
Okay.
It wore off really quickly. Yeah,
and then you wake up screaming.
Yeah, well, multiple times I woke throughout this whole time. I woke up screaming, and at one point, after I'd got my epidural, they had finally came in to give me my epidural, and this was like I don't even know exact times, but I know I'd been there for a good 12, 13 hours. Maybe even 14 or 15 hours. But the anesthesiologist came in and he had specifically said, he goes, I do not know why I am not prepping you for a C-section, but I will be back to prep you for a C-section at some point. And that's when he gave me my epidural. And, that really helped my pain, like tremendously. And, through this time, like the hospital was like, the nurses would come in, one of the nurses, it was always only one nurse at the time. She would come in and she'd be like, do you guys just want do you want your mom and them? Do you want them to go back to their hotel? And I'm like, no, like I want them here. And because my family's very boisterous, they, that they see something is going wrong. And, cause my aunt who she's like a nurse assistant, she was in the medical field. She was a phlebotomist. Like she would tell the nurses like, hey, like sometimes like she'd be like, maybe you guys should try this. Like I was being moved in different positions, trying to do all these different, I was on a ball at one point, like trying to move. I don't even know what I was trying to do at that time.
Well, and that was my question, because the interesting part about this is you didn't really have a plan. You didn't know anything.
No, my plan was way different.
Right.
And that's the one thing I can tell like new moms, like don't be so stuck on keeping your plan, because anytime that plan can be gone. Like it can
shift for sure. It could definitely shift. So your anesthesiologist was surprised that he wasn't prepping you for a cesarean. Why?
I have no idea. Still to this day, we don't know.
That is a very interesting comment to me.
It is. And in the judgment, the judge said even the anesthesiologist just passing by knew that this was heading towards a C-section. And how? Whether that was because he saw the fetal heart rate monitor strip or what he does, we do not know why.
That is interesting. So, the nurse would come in and ask your family if they wanted to leave because people were asking questions or saying, hey, what can we do to help progress this? Because maybe they saw just hours and hours were going by. Which great family, man. I'm thankful that you
have an amazing family.
Yeah, you had some great advocates in your corner. And so how long of, time went on until, nurse came in or something was happening?
36 hours, like exactly, if not a little more. Because, and then at one point it was all day the 13th, like just new positions, time after, no dilation change, nothing. I never in those 36 hours went past a 4 centimeter dilation. I was just in excruciating pain. Well, finally, the evening of the 13th, they said, hey, your family needs to go. Like, you need to get rest. You're not getting rest with your family in here. And so everybody left. I said, that maybe you're right. Like, maybe I need to sleep a little bit, and that's good. So I said, yeah, my grandma's like, are you sure? Like, we don't have to. And I was like, no, you guys are good. Just go you guys need sleep too. You've been here since, everybody drove down. Go get some sleep. So they all left, went to the hotel, which was like 3-4 minutes away. And I went to bed, was sleeping. And when I woke up a couple hours later, at this point, there had already been meconium and blood clots coming out of me, and trying to place the fetal scalp electrode, and blood was still coming out. There was and my aunt was like, hey, we're like at the 24-hour mark. The baby should be coming out. No baby. They said this is normal. She's a new mom. We're going to have this baby naturally. And that was the main thing. The doctor, when the one time when the doctor came in before the C-section, she said that this baby was going to come like vaginally instead of a cesarean, and that this was just normal, but this baby was coming vaginally. And I was like, I don't care how this baby comes. Like, really? C-section, not like just get her out. And they still wouldn't take her out. They said it's normal.
It had been over 24 hours and there was blood clotting. And there was meconium present because your water had been broken this whole time. And that's why they started the Pitocin, right? And you had been on a certain amount of Pitocin for hours. And they're telling you it's normal?
Yes. Everything was good. This is just how pregnancies with new moms work, So at that time, I thought everything was good.
And you said the doctor came in and was like, the goal is we're going to have this baby. We're going to have this baby vaginally. Like, that was
her goal.
That was the doctor's goal.
Yes, that was not mine. Like, I did not care one way or the other.
Well, of course. I mean, I would say most moms, when we talk about, and you said your plan and kind of be, I hear this all the time, be flexible. Don't be uptight about your plan. And that's what I talk about, a lot is there's going to be navigations. Like, we can desire something, right?
Absolutely.
You can desire a vaginal unmedicated birth, but sometimes that just doesn't happen that way. I mean, no. I was one of those. I remember, I'm like, that Pitocin hurts. I'd like an epidural, please. And nothing is a failure. Everything is just a strategy and a navigation. So after they told you that this was normal and your aunt said something, it's so interesting to me that they're like, yeah, we need your family out of here so you can rest. Did you rest when your family left?
I did. I went to sleep and I slept for a good couple hours. But when I woke up, I had cold blankets all over me. I had ice packs. I had an oxygen mask on me. Like, I woke up in a panic because that is not how I went to bed. I did not have an oxygen mask on. I had no idea what was even happening. Like, I took that oxygen mask off and I was like, started like panicking. I was taking the blankets off. I was dying of heat. I was exhausted. Like, it was horrible the way I woke up. And the nurse ran in and she was like, hey, you need to leave that oxygen mask on. Like, that has to stay on or else, the baby and you may potentially die. You guys have an infection and we're trying to get rid of the infection in your body. Like, I had a very high grade fever. I was alone. Family had all went home. They said, like, we're trying to get rid of the infection in your body. Everything's good. It was a couple more hours. This was at like 10:30, 11:30 at night. Those time frames are a little blurry to me because I was so drugged up at the time too. And then
I will just add here too that choreo, the infection of the uterine lining, does not just happen because the water's broken. It happens because of prolonged water broken and with cervical exams that pushes bacteria into the body. Do you know how many cervical exams you had during this period of time?
No.
Like, too many to count, probably.
Yeah, but they weren't checking for placement.
Right.
So is that the same thing?
Well, a cervical exam, meaning like, what is your cervix doing?
Oh, yeah, to check my, Oh, yeah, I had a lot of those.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah.
And
And those are not comfortable.
that will up your risk of infection. The choreo, I think it doubles, with the risk of infection doubles with each check. So it's horrible to have to like experience something like that, go into bed thinking that you're going to be, calm, and then all of a sudden you have
Yeah,
oxygen
that
and
was
ice
really
pack.
terrifying.
Yeah, I can't even, because your family wasn't even there at this point, was it? Were they?
No, I was by myself. I didn't know. Yeah, I had no idea,
So
nothing.
what did they do after that?
They tried to get me on a peanut ball to try
Okay.
and bounce, like do different things. And it was a couple hours later, a nurse told me to call my family that we were going to have to rush me in for an emergency C-section. It was like 3 in the morning, 3:30. I'm not sure exactly the time there, but I called my family. I got a hold of them. They all rushed to the hospital. I had to call a few times because it was so early. Everybody was sleeping, but they all got there within 20 minutes. And my grandma was the one going back for my C-section. That's what we had planned, or back for when I was pushing, anything like that. And we were sitting there, we were waiting, and the anesthesiologist was in there waiting, and took about an hour and a little more minutes for the doctor to come in for the actual C-section after everything was already prepped and ready to go. At that time, we didn't know why. I do now know why, because of nurses' depositions and things like that. At that time, no, we didn't know why, but she came and rushed us to the back, and it didn't really even feel like she was in a rush. Kind of, she did the C-section, was yanking her out, and then once Azalea was finally out of me, because it felt like she was just tugging and tugging and tugging forever. And I really do appreciate the anesthesiologist, because he was so supportive. Like, I just very vaguely remember his face just being like, hey, everything's gonna be fine, like, we're good, you're good, just breathe. And then all of a sudden, like, my grandma stood up and just started freaking out and just dropped, like, was almost like ready to pass out. And that time I was like freaking out too. I'm like, what happened? Like, I don't hear her cry. I didn't hear nothing. I saw this little figure just pull out of my body, and my grandma's like, she's not the right color, she was freaking out, screaming, and taking her, like, running over to the baby. And I'm yelling at my grandma, because my grandma sometimes has a tendency to really freak out, and so I'm yelling at my grandma because she's kind of making me feel worse. And that the anesthesiologist is trying to calm me down, and then from that moment my mind just shuts it off. I don't know what happened between that time and not waking up. I never went to bed. I say that because that's what I think I did. I did not. Going into the recovery room and talking to the pediatrician. And the pediatrician, at this point, I hadn't seen Azalea. Nothing. Nobody was really telling me anything besides that they were waiting for the pediatrician to come in to talk to us. And it was like 7 a.m. on the 14th, and the pediatrician came in and he said, hey, we're going to life flight your daughter. Her acid levels were not right. Her APGAR scores were really, really low, and we have to life flight her to primaries. And I was like, okay, so they rushed primaries, life flight over, and wheeled her in a little tube where I got to see her, and I could put my hand in there and touch her hand, or, certain things like that. And at that time I couldn't walk still, so I couldn't be taking her or leaving the hospital or anything like that. So I stayed behind, and my aunt flew to primaries with her. Oh. And her dad drove to primaries. And
you have a lovely family. So before we get to that part, devastation to have to first experience all of that and then watch your baby be separated from you, and you have to say, that's tough. That's tough. Let's go back a little bit. Can you fill in a little bit of the pieces of why, from your knowledge of what was happening before you got the cesarean, what was going on, and why was there such a wait?
First off, because of the nurse's depositions and deposing the doctor and doing all these things throughout the 6 years that my attorneys have done, we later found out that the new nurses who were coming in, they weren't, for one, supposed to be even left alone. They were brand new nurses, but they had no overhead staff in a position that they should have been. So the head charge nurse was not even a charge nurse. She wasn't signed off to be a charge nurse. And that was the nurse that got into the little bicker with my mom. And when the new nurse asked...
The IV exchange.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. So she wasn't supposed to be a charge nurse.
No, but she was in that position because the hospital needed that position filled, somebody called in. And so, she was in that position. And when anybody would ask her for help, she refused to help because of the argument that her and my mother got into about the IV.
That is just devastating. Like, that is wild to me.
Yeah. And, at that time we didn't know that, and
Right.
in the deposition, the new nurse said, I felt abandoned because
Absolutely.
the nurse said, I'm not helping with that family. I'm not doing it. And she didn't. I didn't ever see that nurse, but I didn't know why. I didn't question it.
Right.
So.
Because you're a patient. Why would you?
Yeah, I thought, okay. Even though she didn't even know, there was other nurses coming in, but they were all new, they were fresh out of orientation and had no idea. The one said, she goes, I had no idea how to read a fetal heart strip monitor. I did not know how to. And the one said, I didn't even know how to place a fetal scalp electrode. So, the judge said and this was the hardest thing because I didn't know until I heard the judge's verdict, but that, they didn't know how to place that electrode in, and they didn't know that she was face up. And so they were essentially screwing the fetal heart rate or the fetal scalp electrode into her face. And, she has scars under her nose and all the way up and all the way in here. And they're permanent. Like, on cold days, her nose flares up and she has this big old scar, just a gruesome scar under her nose. Or sometimes she'll pick at it and then it starts to bleed.
Let me ask this. When they were ordered to do these things, because usually that's what happens is when a nurse is asking for help or, doing all those things, who was giving the orders to do the internal fetal monitor? So the electrode, what it is,
I believe it was a doctor.
Okay.
Because she just never came in. I just think she gave orders from her phone or from, her computer, whatever it was. That's how the orders would come through.
And when the nurses just didn't know how to do something, they were just abandoned and they just did the best they could. Did they ever get it in, or did they just give up?
I believe that it got in, and I think but it wasn't in the right position.
Okay, that makes sense for position she was in.
But the reason why all that was going on, right? The reason why the C-section took so long once it was called for was because the doctor was really sleeping just a minute down the hallway and nobody went to wake her up. And she said in her deposition that, yep, she did. She went to sleep.
And that was it? Like, that's all she said?
Yeah, she had the monitor on her phone. She could read the fetal heart rate monitor on her phone, but if she was reading it 12 hours before my C-section was one of the very first signs of, hey, you might need to watch this. At 7:30 on the 13th was the first sign of, like, this baby might potentially need a C-section. And then by 10:30 that night was like every clip of the fetal strip, every second that it ticked was another alarming.
Right. A decel or something.
Yeah. Yeah, a decel.
Yeah, yep. A decel. And you learn a lot of terminology along with this. And, childbirth education classes are good for these, for these types of things. But, it's amazing to me that you did not get any type of like guidance, or this is why we're doing what we're doing, or this is the goal that we're after, or you just had. So who would come in? What nurse would come in and tell you that these things were normal, like the blood clots or the meconium or those things? Was it the new ones? And that's just all they knew to say.
Just pretty much everything's fine. This is just regular for 36 hours.
I am thankful for your family. I really am. I'm thankful that they knew that something was out of line. You don't have to have a background in childbirth education. You don't have to have a medical degree to have intuition and know that. And of course, you said your aunt does have a medical background. Hey, these things are not lining up right or very well. Can we get some answers on this? And for those who just don't know what they don't know, those things are not normal in a delivery or a labor process. If there's any kind of excessive bleeding or clotting or anything like that, that is a high alert status. But was that before you ran a fever or after? It was after.
I believe that was after. Don't quote me on that.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So all of these things were happening. So let's just say, let's line them up, right?
Yeah.
You went to the hospital because your water had been broken. They started Pitocin, but you really didn't get the education of why. They just said, this is what needs to happen. You thought everything was normal because they had kind of explained it as, no, we need to get this labor going because you're a first-time mom. But you were kind of already not really showing signs of contractions, but it didn't take long for the Pitocin to do its thing. And it did its thing very quickly, but they still turned it up. Contractions were very close together. And you got fentanyl for a while because you were told that you couldn't have an epidural. Their policy was until you were 4 centimeters. And so it took a long time for you to be able to get one of those, which still blows my mind. That's like cruel and unusual punishment in itself. And then the lack of knowledge, the lack of medical care, the lack of understanding, and then you being delayed into the cesarean process, which was very overwhelming for you and your grandma. Poor grandma. Anesthesiologists were going to high five though, because they were, we're going to high five the anesthesiologists. There's, we always look for the heroes in the crowd, and we're going to high five this anesthesiologist for making you feel safe in an unsafe situation. And then baby comes. Probably the least expected things are now happening, and you're having to say goodbye to your baby that's being life lifted to another hospital. And then they told you that things were off. Baby's Apgar score, I'm pretty sure, was what, probably maybe a 1 or even
1. One was 1, and then I believe the other ones were like 1, 4, and 3, or 1, 3, and 4. They were very low.
So the doctor that did the cesarean, was that the doctor that was asleep that just finally came?
And she had been the only doctor that I'd seen in my whole stay.
The whole time. Was this over a weekend? Was there like just this doctor on call over the weekend?
Yeah, she was an on-call doctor.
Okay. Over the weekend. Okay, so you were able to touch her through the glass, the cubicle. Then after that, what happened? You wanted to go, but you couldn't, right?
I had different ways that I had to take a bowel movement before I could leave. I had to walk. My epidural had to wear off, which my epidural wore off, and I was walking the very next day. If not even that, by that afternoon. But I could not take a bowel movement. That was just not happening. And it didn't for 3 days. Everybody was at primaries visiting Azalea, and it essentially, when we found out in our medical records, I would have had time to drive home, and I didn't, because that was not what they had told us. I essentially, there would have been time. My water was fine at that time. And so that's something really hard. Like, I really, I think my mom struggles with that too.
Oh,
just guilt of us not going home.
You didn't know what you didn't know.
No.
Yeah, tell your mom. This is this hospital's fault. This is nothing.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I am going to stop that right here. We're just not going to do that. Because and you're right, the evidence does show, and the hospital was wrong. And this is the information that I'm really trying to educate on a lot of is, evidence shows that just because your water is breaking does not mean you just have to rush. It's not like the movies. Our body has a little bit of time that it can take. Now those studies don't have anything to do with group B positive people, but it is, there is time to be able to get where you needed to, to be. It doesn't mean even those studies say that 95% of people go into actual full-blown labor within 24 hours. So for, a lot of hospitals or a lot of doctors will say, if your water's leaking or breaking, head to the hospital. But it's more like in this panicky mode. But y'all don't, and for whoever's listening that wants to read up on premature rupture of membranes at term, that's what that is. It's evidencebasedbirth.com prom. And you can read about it. I'm not saying to stay home. I'm not saying to go, but there's absolutely education on that. And y'all just didn't have it. And nobody gave it to you. And you just didn't know what you didn't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
As moms, she just wanted to do the right thing for you. And you had fantastic support. I'm just going to still high five your family.
My grandpa, he sat back, and just kind of watched everything. And he was like the quiet man. And he's from Nevada, and that's where he lives. And he has friends down there who are medical malpractice attorneys that he grew up with. And that's how we came about. We had our attorneys, like, he was messaging them saying, hey, like, something's not going on right here. And I think I'm going to have something for you to look at after this is all said and done. So, and she said, okay, just keep in contact. And so, we spoke to our attorneys a week after Azalea was at primaries, and they started requesting documents, because just everything just was not right. Mm-hmm. Nothing was right at all. And, when after I had Azalea, they came in like later on that afternoon after I had walked, or the next morning, and they had said, hey, there's a way that you can leave, and I was on pain medications and everybody was gone. They were up visiting Azalea, and the nurse came in and said, there is a way that you can leave and go be with your daughter. And I said, oh, there is. And she was like, yeah. And she handed me this paper and said, you just have to sign this and you're free to go. And I was like, oh, great. So I called my aunt and I said, hey, auntie, like, I can come be at the hospital. I can leave. And she was like, really? And I was like, yeah. And she goes, I'll come down there. I'm going to read that paper that they gave you. And so she came and read it, and it was a release of liability. And she was like, you're not signing this. And that was the hardest thing, because she goes, if you leave, this is like, you're risking everything. You can't leave. And I was like, okay. And she goes, so I was there for another 2 days until I finally was able to take a bowel movement and leave. And so we left, and that's when I got to go up to the hospital and be with Azalea. But throughout this whole time, they, for 12 hours at a time, sometimes I would go without pain medications. They'd forget to give it to me. My aunt was like, do you guys like need help? Like, sometimes maybe you can fight the pain before the pain occurs. Like, they'd let me sleep all night, or then my blood pressure would be so high because my family would come in to try and tell me what was going on with Azalea. But then it was hard. That was really hard to try and tell me while I'm so not fully there, to tell me everything that was at that time going on with Azalea. Now I understand. At that time, I was a panicked mess. Yeah. And my blood pressure would go beaming high, and my mom and the nurses, everywhere was just tension. Yeah. My mom and the nurses would get into an argument, and then I would only hear what I wanted to hear. I would start freaking out, thinking that my daughter was dead, and then they were coming in and giving me a medication to sedate me because I was just so freaked out, and my blood pressure was just so high that I was on the verge of having a stroke. And it was a horrible, horrible, horrible 3 days after. I was glad that I was able to leave.
So you even had a nurse that said, hey, we have a way for you to leave, but didn't tell you that it was like a release for, medical, like you can sign out, AMA, which is, against medical advice. But she didn't say that. She just said, hey, there's a way for you to leave. Mm-hmm. And again, I am thankful that your aunt was like, wait a minute, this doesn't sound good. You need medical care, because you had major surgery. You had a lot of things going on, and it was good that she caught that. That might have saved your life. There's no telling.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. There's no telling what, with all the information that you were taking in from your daughter's condition. Wow. And then having to, be sedated, and you were there, you said 3 days after, mm-hmm. And then you were able to go home.
Leave. We went to a hotel for the next month. For that month, I stayed in Utah. I never went home.
What then? Tell us about Azalea.
I finally was able to go see her, and she was in just a one-on-one room with one nurse in the NICU. And, the NICU is a beautiful place, but it's also like a nightmare. It's not just about everything with Azalea, but it's also everything else that you see behind those walls, and all the other stories that are in there, and the people that you meet, and it's every doctor rotation, every doctor coming, there was a new doctor every 3 hours, or a new therapist every 3 hours. And telling me, like, directing me what to do and how to do it and how to give a bath and how to feed. And yeah, very, very rules. There were so many things that you could do and couldn't do. You couldn't come visit at this hour. You can only visit for 3 hours at a time, certain times. Like, it was just a really hard thing to adjust to. Or, sometimes I'd leave at nighttime and be like, okay, well, hope when I get there in the morning that she's still with us and she doesn't have a seizure, or 'cause she couldn't breathe on her own. She was on a ventilator and she was in a therapeutic cooling temperature bed.
Mm-hmm.
She was in there to get that for 3 days until her temperature went down, and then they did an MRI of her brain and then put her temperature back up. And so she was in there for about a week doing all that, so you really couldn't touch her, or very, very little amounts of times. And then we finally were able to, and it's during this point I was still recovering from my C-section, which later on ended up getting an infection and reopening back up, and I was readmitted to a different hospital for 3 more days. But that hospital, I was able to wheel a wheelchair back and do a little hallway down to primaries because I was at the University of Utah, and it was a long jaunt down there, but I rolled all the time. My grandma would help me roll, or somebody was always there rolling me down for those 3 days because I had got done with visiting her, and after my first bowel movement, I never took another one for about 5 days, and my legs had swelled so bad. But it's because my incision had opened up through my V-pack, my little machine that I had on my stitch. And I had no idea until we got back to to the new hospital, and they took off my V-back and it was unstitched and just gross. Very gross. And so they restitched it, fixed it up, did that. And then, I visited Azalea, and we had sat down to have a meeting with the team of doctors after her MRI of her brain, and that's when they told me at that time that Azalea'd never walk or talk or eat, have any function pretty much of any of life, that our first goal right now was to wean her off of the seizure medication and to get her off of the breathing tubes. And that was our first goal. And so we worked on those. We had goals every day, every week, and the goals would change. She finally came off her oxygen machine, but she was still on a feeding tube. She would not latch. There were, and finally we were able to come off the seizure medication about a week before we left the NICU. But then, so all she was on was an NG tube, and we had to learn how to place those, and those are not a fun thing to place. Yeah. Especially when it's a cool thing, because even when you don't have to place it, you have to practice 3 different times, 2 people. So it's like a total of 6 times that you have to take this thing in through the nose and put it in, and then through the all these parts of your nose and into your stomach. Mm-hmm. And then, we finally after the 28 days, we were able to do an overnight stay at the hospital. My grandma and I stayed, and she had to pass a car seat test for 2 hours and keep her oxygen, or else she'd have to start over. So yeah, that was really hard. We were stressed because we had to drive 2.5 hours home with her too. But we passed that and we went home. November 9th.
So fast forward to today. Tell us about her.
Today now, oh man, we've been through a lot between different diagnoses, different milestones. She was very delayed on all her milestones. She never had a seizure again until she was 1.5 years, when she finally had a seizure, and that started her epilepsy battle. And she's been in physical therapy since she was 4 months old, and in Wyoming we don't have medical resources available, especially in the town that I am in. Mm-hmm. We're very, very rural, so we don't have, and we don't have pediatric things. So, and especially kids with disabilities have a really hard time here. There's only one school here that would take a preschooler who has an IEP who is not potty trained. And so Azalea was only able to go to that school, but that school also made mistakes, and things happened there where we ended up having to take her out of it because they ignored her epilepsy, and she ended up being in a seizure for over 45 minutes because of their due to not call 911. And that was a whole crazy experience, and so she wasn't able to go to preschool. We travel back and forth to Utah quite often for speech therapy and occupational therapy, just because if there is one here, there's a waiting list. So she also when she was born, she was diagnosed with cortical vision impairment. And our CDC here, Child Developmental Center, was like, well, we'll bring in our vision therapist once a month for vision therapy. And to me, that just was not enough. Like, I did not understand what once a month was going to do with vision therapy, so, and I get it because the therapist has to travel from her town to here, which she can't, so I understand, but I also did my own research every time she had a new diagnosis, and I built her a cool tent with lights, and it was blacked out, and it had shiny things and necklaces, and we spent time in there and did our own therapy.
Good for you.
They said that she had a really high potential of having cerebral palsy.
Mm-hmm.
But a nurse in the NICU told me, I don't have any science behind this. She goes, but if you rub her body, her bones, you stimulate everything. She goes, it might help. And so, I can't tell you the amount of times that either me, my mom, my grandma, somebody in the home was rubbing her hands, stretching her, doing different body movements every day.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm thankful, she does not have that, but she has speech apraxia. She has a mood disorder, a regulation mood disorder. She's not cognitively functional. She understands a lot, but also not to the understanding level. Like, she'll understand if you tell her something, but she also doesn't understand discipline or fear or pain. She does not recognize pain like us. She had a ear infection one time, and I didn't even know that she had an ear infection. The only reason I found out was because it started bleeding, and she was fine. Nothing was wrong with her. And I'm like wiping this blood, trying to figure out where this blood's coming from. And finally I look and I'm like, is that coming from your ear? So I took her to the hospital, and the doctor was like, she should be in pain. This would have you on your knees. Like, her eardrum is ruptured. And so he gave me some drops. We've got that healed and everything. Or, when she gets sick, she doesn't act sick. She behaves sick. So then, she's trying to run out the door, or trying to hit and attack you, or pull your hair, very short fused. And then she'll have a seizure. And then I'll think, I think she's sick. And there was a time, January 2024, where from January 2024 to May 2024, she was having a seizure once a week. And it got to the point where she was having a seizure every Tuesday at the same time frame. And I would just calculate everything, I just would see like why she was having this seizure, what was causing it. We could never figure out what, why, how, but it was every Tuesday from a certain time zone. And then if it had said, say it skipped for 3 days, that it'd be on a Friday for the next 2 weeks. And so, the neurologist would up her medication, add a new one, do all this stuff. And I'm like, we cannot keep adding, like, something has, I was never satisfied until I was satisfied with what I wanted, because my daughter does not deserve to be medicated up, or she deserves to be as level grounded like us as much as possible, and so that really hurt, trying to give her medication twice a day, and at some points 5 different ones that just weren't helping.
And all of this because somebody didn't know what they were doing. Other people were ignoring their responsibilities and their jobs, because the one thing in the closing that the judge did say, that I know a lot of people have heard, is him saying this went from a healthy pregnancy, a very healthy baby, to not. And how did you feel when you heard what the judge said? And I know that it's really long. It's like a 45 minutes, but how did you feel in that time? Did you disassociate? Were you numb?
It was really shocking, actually, because he was so shocked at the level of care that I received, and so it kind of shocked me too. And it was hard to listen to, especially knowing, especially when he said, I could have had that baby safer in the bathroom stall. That was alarming. And, there's another part of the judge's words that he says on the day that I testified. He said he would have assumed that there were too many policies, too many laws, too many things for this to have ever gone as bad as it did. But it did, and here we are, and he just was in shock. He said out of all his 25 years in his career, that the level of breaches and everything that went wrong here, this is by far the worst case that has ever came across his stand. So that was all really, really hard to listen to. You know, I was very emotional, but I felt heard. You know, somebody can actually understand, especially because I've been so quiet about my case.
Mm-hmm.
And not very many people know about Azalea besides like my immediate family. And so that was nice.
Yeah. The overusage of Pitocin, we just don't talk about this a lot. And I think that, you know, there's this balance of, and me being just such a super huge family advocate, there's a balance between, you know, getting a story out and letting others know, you know, hey, this stuff happens. You're not alone. If you feel like something went wrong, please, you know, talk to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but yours was so like blatantly neglectful that when I was listening to that, I thought, what world are we living in for this to happen? Because they're, you know, the Joint Commission over hospitals and the policies that are set in place are supposed to protect you as a patient. And it just, you know, it's just really sad. So, and I have said this before on a couple of videos that I have done, is I am hoping that this makes hospitals sit up and pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
And say, you know what, we need to go evaluate our Pitocin protocols, and we have to go over our buddy system, because I've talked to many labor and delivery nurses. There is a system, there is a checklist, there is, you know, hey, I'm getting ready to go do this. Do you see what I'm doing? Do you see the amount? We're all in this together. What would you love for moms to consider? What do you want other families to know?
You know, just don't be afraid to ask. You know, like, you have that right. And I can only speak more from now and like everything that I've gone through in the 6 years, you know, from especially with Azalea's epilepsy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have to be able to advocate for your kids. And so if you can't, you know, I've had my problem, like, you know, trying to advocate like depression and like anxiety and different things like that, you know, that I've had to be become aware of, because if I'm not able to benefit myself, then I can't benefit my daughter, and I can't calmly advocate. That's taken a lot of learning to do. Mm-hmm. There was nothing that I could have done differently at all, but you know, there's everything more that the hospital can do. And that doesn't just go for Steward, that goes for any hospital that does a person wrong. There's so much more that they can actually do. Like, I told my boyfriend, I said, how is it that he's not able to be a minor or work in a B position unless he has 5 years like experience, you know? But you can be a brand new nurse and go into such a high tension, very life or death role, and be brand new and have no experience and just fresh out of college. Like, there should be, you know, maybe you should have a position in the ER for about a year, or, you know, have that background of being a nurse in the actual field rather than just coming from the textbook.
Yeah, it's a lot. And there's so much more that we could talk about, but we might have to do a part 2. Okay. You know, I just feel like I walk away with, how could this happen? You know, how can this happen? Because, you know, as an educator on the outside, I am more than 3 or 4 times a week being told not to give a lot of information. Don't give medical advice. You don't have a license. You don't have credentials to educate. And I always wonder why. You know, why isn't it okay to talk about the benefits and the dangers of medicines? And, you know, there is a balance, and I do think society is kind of all or nothing sometimes, like, oh no, you know. So that's why I think that this is a story, and I'm so very thankful that you're open to talk about it. And it's just excruciating to hear, and I can't even begin to understand what you have gone through in that birth and in the years of taking care of your daughter. But know that I'm a safe space for you, and I hope that we are going to get together and process more out about the birth itself, hoping that you can put some pieces together and again just move forward. And your mom and your grandma and your aunt is also all invited to those debriefings, because this is, again, I walk away going, how could this happen? How could this happen? So as much as talk about resilience, talk about keeping your power in the process and the resilience of, what, this happened, but over my dead body, am I going to let this continue? And I have to advocate for myself and advocate for my daughter. Like, that was real growth in real time.
And we've continued to battle them, and they've continued to be the same way, throughout those 6 years. We've been in a courtroom with them. We've sat down with them, but then, they decided to just walk away, have nothing to do with the court for the last year almost. So, there's been just so many things that have happened, and ups and downs and trying new things. You can't be afraid to, if something's not working for your child, try something new.
My last question about like the trial and the over it being over and all those things. Did anybody say or take personal responsibility? I mean, I know there's depositions and there's all these things and there's, all the things that happen in a trial. Did anybody say, yeah, that could have been different?
In the depositions, like you said, that's it. The nurse said, I didn't know how, I wasn't properly trained, but it wasn't just one own's fault, one person's. They sat down with us, the hospital did, and we mediated, tried to, but their offer was kind of more disrespectful.
Right.
Like, they offered to pay just barely her past medical bills and leave us with nothing. And then tried to sit there and say, well, if you do this with it and this, then you can incur this much interest in these many years, and then you'll be fine. And so they were like, and you'll still have to use government aid. And have you thought about putting her in a home? And we're like, no, and no.
So much emotional manipulation and blame shifting.
Yeah, absolutely. And tried to intimidate, and that's one thing I think why people are we're thinking, I've had an outpour of responses, thank you for fighting. And I think that's where a lot of people end up giving up, was because I had a beautiful group of attorneys, but during all this, I had one in particular attorney who was like, nope, take it, walk away, you're done. This is it. Kind of right. Yeah, they intimidated you because they just feel that they are so above everybody, but they're not. And they're people just like we were, just like I was when I walked into that hospital, and so I told my attorney, I said, nope, we're not doing that. And she said, no, I agree. So she found a different group of attorneys that we could go off of, and they were like, nope, we agree. So, the battle was on again. So you just can't give up. And that's another thing people, don't, if it's worth fighting for, then keep fighting. And eventually, like my grandma keeps saying, those people who wait put up I've been waiting.
That's right.
And she just deserves to have a good life, at a quality that I can afford.
Yes. And the sad part is you probably won't even see half of that, maybe.
Right. Because the majority of it's economic and pain and suffering, and so there's a cap on it.
Right. But even though you might not see, but maybe half of it, I think the point has been made that this happened. You weren't going to settle for it happening. And you not only fought for, the information and for your daughter, you fought for other people too.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And that, I've come to realize that. And I don't want people to feel like they're alone either, because I faced a lot of issues and I felt alone, but I don't want people to ever feel like that. I dealt with, post-traumatic PT or postpartum depression, and everything else in between. And so that was hard. And I don't want people to feel alone. And, in those 6 years, I've slowly written a book about how I felt and how others, feel and things to change, so, but thank you so much for reaching out, and I really do appreciate it.
You are absolutely welcome. And, thank you again, and we will talk at you soon.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for listening to the Keeping Your Power podcast. I hope this episode reminded you that your voice matters. If it spoke to you, share it with someone who needs the encouragement. You can connect with me at tracidoula.com and on social media at Tracidoula. Next time, we're sitting down with a labor and delivery nurse who accidentally gave birth in her living room. You won't want to miss it. Until then, keep your power in the process.